Tonight, there's a growing push here in the U.S. to label a secretive Russian mercenary group operating in Ukraine as a terrorist organization. The group has an estimated tens of thousands of convicts fighting with it. If any troops trying to desert, they may be killed. Our Patrick Revel spoke with a defector who made his way out of Ukraine and wants the world to know what the Wagner Group is doing there.
They've become a byword for brutality in Ukraine, the Wagner Group. The Russian private military company owned by a top ally of Vladimir Putin. Once in the shadows, operating in as many as 30 countries, now they're at the forefront of the Kremlin's war.
Со стрелковым оружием на бронетехнику.
Andrei Medvedev escaped Russia in January. He's now under protection in Norway. Medvedev was once part of the estimated 50,000 Wagner fighters in Ukraine, a platoon leader for the mercenary group.
When you were in Ukraine, you saw personally members of Wagner execute other soldiers in front of you.
Был случай, видел, привезли 2 человек на полигоне, расстреляли публичным путем.
He says such killings of Wagner troops were routine for those refusing to fight.
Самый лучший исход — это его просто изобьют, очень сильно причем. А самый плохой исход — расстреляют.
Did you see war crimes in Ukraine? Did you see Wagner soldiers commit war crimes?
По-моему, да.
Wagner has threatened to kill defectors.
Are you afraid for your safety?
Опасаться опасаюсь, но бояться не боюсь.
Last year, a video circulated online seemed to show Wagner members executing a former comrade they accused of surrendering. The man put against a wall and then appearing to be struck with a sledgehammer repeatedly. Wagner was founded by Yevgeny Prigozhin, an oligarch close to Russian President Vladimir Putin. A former caterer for Kremlin events, he's often nicknamed Putin's chef. Also wanted by the FBI for his role in meddling in the 2016 presidential election. Before the war, Wagner operated as a semi-covert force for the Kremlin, from Syria to the Central African Republic. But in Ukraine, Wagner swelled into an army within an army. Now playing a key role in the battle for Bakhmut, Wagner's been allowed to recruit convicts from Russia's prisons. The US estimates of its 50,000 members fighting in Ukraine right now, 40,000 are convicts. Video from last September shows Wagner's founder personally addressing hundreds of inmates at a prison in central Russia.
Это Аллах и Бог в деревянном ящике. Я вас живых забираю. Но не всегда живыми возвращаю. Ну что, парни, вопросы есть? Или так все рассказал, что вообще просто?
He promises the men a pardon if they survive fighting for 6 months.
Да? У нас 5 минут на раздумье, пока мы туда заходим. Дальше, пока здесь, решайте. Кто хочет, едет.
Denis Yaroslavsky has faced Wagner troops in eastern Ukraine. He says the prisoners are sent in waves in frontal assaults.
На сегодняшний день ЧВК «Вагнер» использует тактику 1000 тел. Они набирают заключенных, которые даже по законодательству Российской Федерации еще не отбыли срок заключения под стражей, то есть они осуждены, но не отбыли срок. Они набирают их из тюрьмы, набирают их десятками тысяч, в прямом смысле слова. Подписывают с ними контракты и необученных заключенных отправляют умирать в Украину.
Ukraine's military estimates Wagner is suffering thousands of casualties. Footage shows dozens of fresh graves dug near Wagner's base in southern Russia.
На сегодняшний день, с учетом того, что Вагнер использует необученных заключенных, фактически мы их даже не допускаем до огневого контакта. Их уничтожаем дистанционно артиллерией на подходе к Бахмуту. Я уверен, что их погибли уже десятки тысяч. Я уверен, что их просто никто не считает.
over Crimea, Russia is likely to have fewer fighter jets intercepting Ukrainian planes, at least not without NATO sending ample warning through their AWACS planes, and the Chinese HQ-9. Coincidentally, a Pt.2 battery near Kiev fired off 20 missiles in less than a minute. It is questionable if S-400 is capable of matching such anti-saturation defenses. It's plausible just 2 salvo of missiles, meaning up to 24 missiles against 12 targets, is all that an S-400 has time to guide. And frankly, that's the best case scenario. In the real world, there's often uncertainty. People react late, or interceptor missiles don't work. Sometimes more than 2 missiles may be required to actually intercept a target. Some ATACMS might slip through, especially if there are many fired at once. Even several fired at once might not be trivial to intercept in real-world conditions. It's not that all ATACMS are going through. Russian sources claim that at times they intercepted 8 ATACMS on certain days, not known if all were striking the same targets. But evidently Russia is struggling to intercept enough of them. So Ukraine might be burning through their ATACMS stocks, but it may be worth it. Removing an S-400 battery is a huge deal.
It allows them to continue to support their families as well as progress their careers. We're working with the Department of Labor to ensure that not only our company is successful and has the right skills and talent in our employee base, but also that we're helping the entire American industrial base create and have the right skills ready in the moment as we see the generations changing, because we want to ensure that America is strong and that we have the opportunity to move and do all the things that we need to do as
Against an F-16 with 20 or 30-year-old technology, an S-400 is still a very potent piece of weaponry, so those long-range Russian SAMs have to be thinned out. So why the focus on Crimea? Because there the US can find the SAMs more easily. Just dozens of miles away from Crimea, US and NATO planes regularly fly recon routes. They use cameras, radars creating synthetic images, radio signal locators, and so on. And they can watch strikes in real time. During those strikes in mid-June, US Global Hawk recon drone was flying close to Crimea, possibly doing a damage assessment mission. But even that took a long time, with the last parts of the city being overtaken only in May. The events there would eventually lead to an open rebellion of Russia's largest private mercenary army, the Wagner Corps, possibly due to excessive Russian casualties and Russian leadership's handling of said casualties. The end result was dissolution of all mercenary armies in Russia.
After all, critics of Vladimir Putin usually found themselves poisoned or sentenced to decades in prison somewhere in Siberia before long. Surely Prigozhin would not be acting against him. For those who were perplexed by Prigozhin's behavior in 2023, things were cast into sharp relief on the 23rd of June 2023. The Wagner leader had evidently been planning an insurrection or mutiny for several weeks. As intelligence services internationally later revealed, a troop build-up by Wagner in the region around Rostov-on-Don, the southern main command of the Russian military during the invasion of Ukraine. This may have been in response to growing concerns held by Prigozhin that Putin had decided that Wagner had become too powerful and intended to begin dismantling Prigozhin's control of it. However, Prigozhin would claim that the insurrection which he launched on the 23rd of June was incited by a friendly fire missile bombing of a Wagner military installation by the Russian army. This triggered him to release a video claiming that he had seized control of Rostov-on-Don and was sending troops north to Moscow to determine what was going on with the management of the war from Moscow. He directed his ire primarily at Defense Minister Shoigu in this video and avoided criticizing either Putin or the military's chief of the general staff, Valery Gerasimov, perhaps hoping to win over Gerasimov to his cause. With that, a large convoy of Wagner troops headed north for Moscow. All of this was bizarre in some sense. Surely Putin was furious with his erstwhile protege for the rebellion he had attempted a month earlier and would soon seek vengeance. Such speculation was well-founded.
President Biden's administration is urging Ukraine to quickly increase the size of its military by drafting more troops and revamping its mobilization laws to allow for the conscription of those as young as 18. In basic terms, what that means is they're hoping that Ukraine will lower the draft age. National security analyst and retired Marine intelligence officer Hal Kempfer is standing by. When this headline came across my plate, Hal, it made me wonder, why would the White House be pushing this out there? Is Ukraine hurting for troops?
Austin, Ukraine is very much hurting for troops. In fact, they're constant. One of the things they talk about is their lack of manpower on the battlefield.
Due to the boys that became refugees, the bulge visible in the 10 to 15-year-old bracket will essentially be unavailable to Ukraine, and Ukraine will be stuck at 180,000 or so boys maturing per year. Remember, no country can mobilize 100% of people, as workers are also needed, so actual mobilized fresh young men are likely gonna number well under 180,000. Over a long enough period, those percentages will keep dropping. Generally, in world wars, belligerents could not mobilize much over 20% of male population. Initial percentages tend to be higher, but as the war drags on, overall percentages drop.
And they desperately need the manpower. Russia, we talked about this on the air. Russia's been running out of manpower for quite some time. You know, they took folks from their strategic forces, their version of Space Force, if you will, and put them on the front lines as infantry, and they use them in meat waves, these just absolute human slaughter, kamikaze, brain-dead attacks the Russians tend to do.
Because Russia is still not mobilizing its general population. As we said before, Putin's big fear is, if he tries doing that, the people would uprise and he might lose power. Russian army might have to stop their military ops, and the whole war would have been in vain. So the fact that Russia does have many more boys available per year doesn't really help it right now.
2 months after Prigozhin's aborted mutiny, news broke on the 23rd of August 2023 that a plane on which Prigozhin had been traveling, according to the passenger manifesto, had crashed near Tver in Russia, whilst flying between Moscow and St. Petersburg. By the 24th, it had been all but confirmed that Prigozhin was on the plane, and he was presumed dead as reports filtered in of the recovery of his body from the wreckage site.
It was very difficult for me to watch this old Russian woman pick up the remaining pieces of her life off the floor. I couldn't help but think of my own grandmother, who had survived some of the first aerial bombardments ever during the Spanish Civil War. 9 decades later, and the only thing that seemed to have changed was our proficiency. This was the first house in Russia that I had been inside, and what instantly struck me was the level of poverty, the smell of trash, and of people who didn't have running water for ages. According to 2023 information, the average monthly Russian salary is just 71,000 rubles, or about $750. The number of Russians who say they can't afford basic necessities has jumped from 30% to 50% in the past 2 years. More Russian soldiers have died from the poorest regions of Russia than anywhere else, according to stats compiled by Mediazona.
There's practically no standard of living in a lot of regions in Russia. There are no job opportunities, there's no income, families are poor, the people are poor, and so on. So you take a poor population that nobody cares about, that can't realize its potential, and you send them to war. There you can do whatever you want, kill, rape, and pillage this country. And people are going, firstly, to earn money they would never have made in Russia otherwise. Secondly, they can pillage Ukraine. And both Russia and North Korea are ready for war. But the modern world isn't.
Ukrainian morale, which was once a strong point of the Ukrainian military, was dipping. Russia was making very small, slow gains on several points along the Eastern Front. By February, Avdiivka was all but surrounded.
Been international outrage and condemnation at the news that the most prominent opposition leader in Russia, Alexei Navalny, has died suddenly in prison, according to the country's prison service. The 47-year-old was President Putin's most prominent and outspoken critic and had been jailed on extremism charges which were widely considered to be politically motivated. President Biden said tonight that President Putin was responsible for Mr. Navalny's death, and it was yet more proof of his brutality.
Smiling, cracking jokes. This was Alexei Navalny yesterday, as he gave testimony by video link from prison. Even court officials managed to smile. But today, Russia's prison service said that Mr. Navalny was dead. It claimed that inside this penal colony, he'd fallen unconscious and that medical teams couldn't save him. Russian TV rarely mentions Alexei Navalny. It read out the prison service statement about his death and moved on to other news. He was Vladimir Putin's most vocal critic, a protest leader, an anti-corruption campaigner who'd long clashed with the Kremlin. I remember this 6 years ago.
Alexei Navalny is Russia's most prominent opposition figure and President Putin's most vocal critic. He's been barred from running in the presidential election. He's now being arrested by police.
In 2020, in Siberia, he'd been poisoned with a nerve agent and airlifted to Germany for life-saving treatment. He accused the Kremlin of trying to assassinate him. There's a palpable sense of disbelief.
I was see the news on my phone, and first my reaction was like, it's just a joke, it can be real. But then the news was coming more and more and more, and I was crying like for 1 hour.
What was your reaction when you heard the news about his death?
I was with my friends. I was broken. I really thought that it couldn't happen.
Russia kept pushing. During February, it took over 100 square kilometers of area. It was the most territory it took in a single month since February 2023, a year ago.
That has been bad news for Ukraine. Russia has made gains. In February of this year, they captured Avdiivka. That was the town that after they captured Bakhmut, they moved, their focus became Avdiivka. There was ferocious, very bloody fighting there. First time personally that a friend of mine, someone I'd met and befriended in the Ukrainian armed forces, was killed there. Then in May, we saw Russia launch a surprise attack into Kharkiv Oblast. So having been repelled from most of Kharkiv in the first autumn of the conflict, Russian forces massed in Belgorod, largely undetected, and managed to seize ground, particularly around Vovchansk. And they still hold a pocket of territory along the Russian frontier with Kharkiv. They continue to fight hard, these grinding, meat grinder offensives in Donetsk. And
the indictment brings felony charges against Donald John Trump.
It's another historic moment in a series of historic moments. Former U.S. President Donald Trump indicted again. This, the fourth case against him, adding up to a combined 91 charges. The first indictment less than 5 months ago. Trump accused of falsifying business records.
A little bit old, that chart. That chart's a couple of months old, and if you want to really see something that's said, take a look at what happened.
I got you, sir. I got you, sir.
Let me get my shoes, sir.
Hold that in your head. It's bloody.
So we gotta move to the bus. Let me get my shoes.
Okay, my shoes down.
Watch out.
Я, пользуясь случаем, хочу поздравить его с избранием на пост президента Соединенных Штатов Америки. Я уже говорил, что мы будем работать с любым главой государства, которому окажет доверие американский народ. Так будет действительно и на практике. Вы знаете, можно тоже как угодно к нему относиться, ведь все изначально в первой его итерации президентской говорили, что он бизнесмен в основном, и он мало чего в этом понимает в политике, ошибок может наделать. Ну, во-первых, я вам могу сказать, его поведение в момент покушения на его жизнь, я не знаю, но на меня произвело это впечатление. Он мужественный человек оказался. И дело не только в поднятой руке и в призыве бороться за их общие идеалы. Дело не только в этом. Хотя это, конечно, знаете, на драйве, на таком все как бы.
Since Vladimir Putin gave the order for the invasion of Ukraine 2 years ago, questions have grown about how far Russia's leader is willing to go.
There are claims that this has to do with the new incoming administration in America. But I was curious to know what Ukrainians think of this development.
Donald Trump just won the election in the United States. He is saying that he wants to end the war very quickly. How does Ukraine plan to navigate potential shifts in U.S. foreign policy?
I look at everything a tad optimistically, because I believe that Mr. Trump is a man who has a rational approach to assessing one phenomenon or another. Moreover, he is a person that always takes the initiative. He wants to be number one, which is quite cool, because you can't just come up and say, look, there's a scenario for freezing the conflict. There's a scenario of conceding something to Russia, because these scenarios show that Putin is number one. I can't imagine that Trump's ready to be number two after Putin. That would be odd. Why? Because Putin, in comparison to Trump, is a tiny midget.
August saw gradual buckling of Ukrainian defenses in the east, with Russia taking double the territory area compared to July. Ukraine was retreating from mid-sized towns like Novokhodivka, which fell in late August. Ukraine was seemingly so low on manpower that even urban defenses were not something it could utilize.
After that August offensive into Kursk, we saw a phenomenal strike by Ukraine against an ammunition depot in Toropets. That was the one, there have been many of these long-range strikes, but that one really stood out. The explosions were so large, they were measured by seismologists as mini earthquakes. The Estonian Defense Intelligence Agency estimated that some 30,000 tons of Russian and North Korean ammunition were destroyed in those long-range drone strikes, and that's
monthly deaths may be reaching 8,000. Mediazona has to date found evidence for 82,000 dead Russian troops. Adding the modifiers mentioned above, Mediazona suggests that anywhere from 126 to 182,000 Russian troops have actually died to date, to mid-December.
The willingness of the Russian military to sacrifice thousands of soldiers in a blunt force effort to gain territory has been a defining feature of the war. The best time to collect the bodies is in bad weather, with fog and rain, because drones don't fly in it. Viewed from drones over the battlefields across eastern Ukraine, Russian soldiers can be seen frozen in the moment of their deaths, motionless on frost-covered fields pockmarked with craters. They are sprawled atop the blasted-out armored vehicles or alongside destroyed tanks.
We talk right now that, we stand up to our principles and values and statutes. We don't. I mean, there's an elephant in this room, which is called by name Russian Federation delegation. I mean, if they are witnesses, if I were a witness and somebody asked me, who's the war criminal? Well, I would point to the backbenchers in this room. And it's just disgrace. It's a disgrace that this delegation is here. Particularly the delegation that consists of members who are sanctioned individuals who voted to annex independent countries' territories. Donbass, Kherson, Zaporizhia Oblast, Lugansk. Those are the principles this institution was vouched to protect and guard. And we're sitting like nothing happened. I would use the momentum, and apologies, Mr. Chair. I will and convey a message to the Russian Federation, delegation sitting in this room. And I will quote the Ukrainian border guards. Русский военный корабль пошел.
Military operation. All of this is happening while Putin and his cronies are still being impacted by the raft of sanctions the US and much of Europe put in place when Russia invaded Ukraine.
What do you make of the statement? I woke up today to the headline that Trump had called for a firing squad for Liz Cheney. And this is what I really don't like about the media. No, he didn't. He did not. You don't have to move me to not like Donald Trump.
He says
more
so
than
many
I
shitty
already,
things. Why do you have to do that?
And by the way,
Yeah.
if you Pete don't realize it, well, here's what he said. He's criticizing him for being a war hawk. I mean, she is Dick Cheney's daughter. He said, she's a radical war hawk. Let's put her with a rifle standing there with 9 barrels shooting at her, okay. Let's see how she feels about it. You know, they're all war hawks when they're sitting in Washington in a nice building saying, oh, gee, we'll send tens of thousands of troops right into the mouth of the enemy. Now, of course, he expresses himself horribly. He has to add, she's a stupid person because he's a moron.
Trump knows what it's really like from Vietnam.
Okay. But just to be clear, this is exactly what hippies always said. This is exactly what peaceniks always said. This is Fortunate Son, the song. It's like, you know what? It's very easy to sit in your building and send young men to die. Apropos of Ukraine, because, I don't know, that war doesn't look like it's going in the right direction.
Not at all, no.
But just so, you know, just don't lie to me. I don't like Donald Trump. Don't lie to me and tell me he wants in front of a firing squad. He was saying something that, by the way, if it came out of the mouth, some of it, not the stupid part, again, sounds like what hippies used to say.